I was 29 years old when my entire world collapsed around me. My name is Camila, and I never thought I'd be packing my childhood bedroom while tears streamed down my face. This house was filled with memories, holiday gatherings, birthday celebrations, family movie nights. When my parents faced foreclosure, I didn't hesitate to transfer $20,000 from my savings. So why was my mother's voice ringing in my ears, "Get out and never come back," as I folded my last shirt? Before we continue this story, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Hit that subscribe button and stick around to discover how my dad had the audacity to ask why I stopped paying their mortgage after they threw me out of the house I just saved. Growing up in suburban Atlanta, I had what most would consider a typical middle-class American childhood. My father, Brian, worked in sales at a telecommunications company, while my mother, Stephanie, taught at the local elementary school. We weren't wealthy by any means, but we never went without necessities. My parents took pride in our modest two-story home with its small backyard, where we'd host summer barbecues for neighbors and friends. I have fond memories of my childhood. Dad teaching me to ride a bike in our driveway, Mom helping with science fair projects at the kitchen table, family game nights that often ended in laughter. They emphasized education making sacrifices so I could participate in extracurricular activities and college prep programs. When I earned a scholarship to study computer science at a university in California, they couldn't have been prouder. After graduation, I landed a job as a software developer at a promising tech startup in San Francisco. The salary was competitive, especially for someone fresh out of college. While California's cost of living took a substantial chunk of my income, I was financially responsible, building an emergency fund, contributing to my 401k, and even starting to save for a down payment on my own place someday. Despite the physical distance, I maintained a close connection with my family. We scheduled weekly video calls where I'd update them on my projects, and they'd share neighborhood gossip. I flew home for major holidays and sent thoughtful gifts for birthdays and anniversaries. In many ways, our relationship had matured into a friendship as I established my independent adult life. Then came the call that would change everything. It was a Tuesday evening in March when my father's name flashed across my phone screen. I answered with my usual cheerfulness, but his tone immediately told me something was wrong. "Camila, I hate to ask this, but we're in trouble," he said, his voice uncharacteristically strained. "The bank sent a foreclosure notice. We've fallen behind on the mortgage payments." My stomach dropped. "What happened? I thought everything was fine when we talked last week." He explained that a perfect storm had hit their finances. My mother had required unexpected surgery in January, resulting in medical bills their insurance only partially covered. Then a company restructuring had reduced his commission structure, slashing his income by nearly 30%. They'd been trying to manage by cutting expenses and using credit cards, but they'd reached a breaking point. "We need to catch up on 4 months of payments plus penalties," he explained. "That's about $20,000 to stop the foreclosure process." "What about Jason?" I asked, referring to my 26-year-old brother who still lived at home while working at a local retail store. "Your brother's barely making above minimum wage. He helps with groceries and utilities, but he can't contribute to something this big," my father said with resignation. I felt torn. That $20,000 represented a significant portion of my savings, funds I'd been disciplined about building for my future security. Yet how could I let my parents lose their home, the place filled with our family's history? "Let me look at my finances and call you back tomorrow," I promised, my mind already racing through calculations and consequences. After my father's distressing call, I spent a sleepless night reviewing my financial situation. My savings account had just over $38,000, the result of 3 years of careful budgeting and modest living in one of America's most expensive cities. Taking out $20,000 would leave me with less than half of my emergency fund. The next morning, I called my financial advisor, Tanya, hoping she might offer an alternative solution I hadn't considered. "Camila, I understand your desire to help family," she said after I explained the situation. "But that's a substantial gift that could set back your own financial goals by years. Have your parents explored all their options? Loan modifications? hardship programs, selling and downsizing. Her questions made me realize I didn't actually know what steps my parents had already taken. When I called my father back and gently pressed for details, his answers were vague. He mentioned speaking with the bank, but didn't elaborate on specific programs they'd discussed. That weekend, I met my close friends Aisha and Daniel for brunch and shared my dilemma. $20,000 is a lot of money, Aisha said, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. What guarantee do you have that they won't end up in the same situation a few months from now? Daniel was more blunt. It sounds like they're expecting you to bail them out rather than making tough decisions about their financial reality. Maybe the responsible thing is to help them transition to a more affordable living situation. Their perspectives were valid, but they didn't understand the emotional weight of my childhood home. This wasn't just a house. It was where we celebrated every milestone, where my height mark still adorned the kitchen doorframe, where my mother's garden had bloomed for 20 years. After days of internal struggle, I made my decision. I would help, but with conditions. I called my parents and explained that I would transfer the money, but I needed transparency about their financial plan moving forward to ensure this was a one-time intervention. "Of course, sweetheart," my mother said, her voice thick with emotion. "We can't tell you how much this means to us. You're saving our home." My father promised to share their monthly budget and show me documentation once the mortgage was brought current. "We'll pay you back eventually," he assured me, though we both knew that was unlikely given their financial situation. I initiated the wire transfer the next day, watching a significant portion of my financial security disappear with a few clicks. The relief in my parents' voices when I called to confirm the transaction was palpable. My mother cried repeatedly, thanking me and promising they would never forget my generosity. For the first few weeks after sending the money, communication with my parents remained warm and frequent. They sent photos of the mortgage statement showing the account was now current, along with a letter confirming the foreclosure proceedings had been halted. But as April turned to May, I noticed subtle changes. My parents began missing our weekly video calls or cutting them short. My texts sometimes went unanswered for days. When we did speak, they seemed reluctant to discuss their financial situation, despite my earlier request for transparency. Growing concerned, I made a decision I would take 2 weeks of remote work and fly home to Georgia. I wanted to see for myself that everything was okay, and perhaps help them develop a sustainable financial plan. I texted my parents, "Good news. I'll be working remotely from home for 2 weeks starting next Monday. Can't wait to see you all." Their response was surprisingly muted. A brief, "looking forward to it," without the excitement I'd expected. As my flight touched down in Atlanta, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The moment I stepped through the front door of my childhood home, subtle differences caught my attention. The entryway featured a new console table I didn't recognize. In the living room, I noticed a large smart TV that definitely hadn't been there during my Christmas visit. My mother greeted me with a hug that felt slightly stiff, while my father gave a distracted hello before returning to something on his tablet. "We didn't know exactly when you'd arrive, so dinner isn't ready yet," my mother explained, leading me to my old bedroom, which looked untouched since my last visit. During dinner, the conversation remained superficial. Questions about my flight, comments about the weather, gossip about neighbors. Any attempt to steer the discussion toward their financial situation was skillfully redirected. When I directly asked how they were managing with the mortgage payments, now my father quickly responded, "Everything's under control. No need to worry about adult problems during your vacation." "It's not a vacation, Dad. I'm working remotely," I corrected gently. "And since I contributed a significant amount to help, I think I'm entitled to understand the financial plan." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table before my mother brightly suggested dessert, effectively ending the conversation. Later that evening, my brother Jason returned from his shift at the electronics store. While we hadn't been particularly close growing up, our 5-year age gap and different interests creating natural distance, I hoped he might provide some insight into what was happening. "Hey, got a minute to catch up?" I asked, finding him in the kitchen searching for a late-night snack. He shrugged non-committally, but sat down at the counter with his bowl of cereal. I noticed some new things around the house, I began carefully. The TV, the entryway table. Jason snorted. Yeah, and Dad's new golf clubs, and Mom's designer purse collection she thinks no one notices. My stomach tightened. They've been shopping. I thought they were in financial crisis. They were, he confirmed between bites. Until you sent that money. Suddenly there was cash flow again. They paid enough on the mortgage to stop the foreclosure, but then he trailed off, seeming to realize he might be saying too much. Then what, Jason? He sighed. Look, I don't want to get in the middle of this. They're still my parents and I live here. But maybe check the mail tomorrow when they're both at work. The next day, after my parents left and Jason headed to his shift, I did exactly that. Among the bills and advertisements was a mortgage statement. With trembling hands, I opened it and scanned the contents. The payment history showed they had indeed made a large payment in March, approximately $12,000, not the $20,000 they'd claimed they needed. And April's payment was marked overdue. My mind raced. Where had the remaining $8,000 gone? And why were they already behind again just 2 months later? I continued my investigation, finding credit card statements showing purchases at high-end department stores, golf equipment, retailers, and electronics shops, all dated after my financial contribution. A sick feeling settled in my stomach as the pieces came together. That evening, I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when I overheard my parents arguing in their bedroom, their voices carrying through the heating vent. She's asking too many questions, my mother hissed. What if she finds the statements? She won't, my father insisted. And even if she does, what's she going to do? Demand the money back. It was a gift. We should have been more careful with the spending, at least until she went back to California. We deserved a few nice things after all the stress. Besides, she makes plenty of money at that tech job. She'll never miss it. I leaned against the counter, my knees weak. The betrayal cut deep, not just the misuse of funds, but the calculated deception and dismissal of my sacrifice. I'd eaten ramen noodles for dinner 3 nights a week for months to save that money. By the time my parents came downstairs, I had made my decision. We would have this conversation tonight, and I would have answers. I set the table for dinner with unusual precision, placing the mortgage statement and credit card bills beneath my plate like hidden weapons. My hands trembled slightly as I heard my parents and brother taking their seats. I had rehearsed what to say, how to remain calm and factual, but my racing heart threatened to overpower my resolve. This looks delicious, Camila, my mother commented as I brought the lasagna to the table. My father nodded in agreement, reaching for the garlic bread. I took a deep breath. Before we eat, I'd like to discuss something important. My father's fork paused midway to his mouth. Can't it wait until after dinner? No need to spoil a good meal with serious talk. Actually, it can't wait. I pulled the mortgage statement from beneath my plate and placed it in the center of the table. I found this today. The color drained from my mother's face while my father's expression hardened. You went through our mail, he challenged, attempting to shift the focus to my actions rather than theirs. Yes, I did. After overhearing your conversation about hiding financial information from me, I laid out the credit card statements next to the mortgage document. You told me you needed $20,000 to save the house from foreclosure. This shows you paid only $12,000 toward the mortgage, and now you're already behind on payments again. My mother's eyes darted to my father, silently urging him to handle the situation. Financial management is complicated, he began in a condescending tone. Sometimes funds need to be allocated in ways that aren't immediately obvious, like designer purses and golf clubs. I interrupted, my voice rising despite my efforts to remain composed. You lied to me. You took advantage of my love and concern for this family. We did not lie, my mother interjected sharply. We needed help, and you offered it. What we did with the money was completely misrepresent its purpose. I felt tears threatening but forced them back. I ate cheap meals and lived in a tiny apartment to save that money. I compromised my own financial security because I thought you were in danger of losing your home. Oh, here we go with the martyr routine, my mother scoffed, her demeanor shifting from defensive to offensive. Always so perfect, so responsible, Camila. You think because you have a fancy tech job in California that you can judge how we live. I stared at her in disbelief. This wasn't the loving mother who had taught me to tie my shoes and kissed my scraped knees. This isn't about judgment. It's about honesty and respect. You could have asked for help with general finances. Instead, you manufactured a crisis to extract maximum funds. My brother, who had been silently watching the exchange, unexpectedly spoke up. Mom and Dad have been under a lot of pressure. Maybe they splurged a little after the stress of nearly losing the house. Is that so terrible? I turned to him, stunned by his defense. They didn't splurge a little, Jason. They misappropriated thousands of dollars and are already defaulting on the very mortgage they claim to be saving. How can you defend that? Because they're our parents, he shouted. They raised us, supported us. So what if they're not perfect with money? Family supports family, no questions asked. That's exactly the kind of enabling attitude that... Enough! My mother slammed her hand on the table, causing the glasses to rattle. Her face contorted with rage as she stood up, pointing toward the door. I will not be lectured in my own home by my ungrateful daughter. If you think we're such terrible people, then get out and never come back. The room fell silent except for my mother's heavy breathing. My father stared at his plate, unwilling to meet my eyes or contradict his wife. Jason looked between us, seemingly torn but ultimately loyal to the parents who still provided his housing. In that moment, I realized I was utterly alone in this house, full of my supposed family. The betrayal wasn't just financial. It was the complete dismissal of my feelings, my sacrifice, and my right to the truth. With as much dignity as I could muster, I stood up. I'll be gone by morning. I climbed the stairs to my childhood bedroom with leaden feet, pulled out my suitcase from the closet, and began methodically packing my belongings. Tears blurred my vision as I folded clothes I'd left behind years ago. High school t-shirts, college sweatshirts, jeans that probably no longer fit. I wasn't taking them because I needed these items. I was taking them because I understood with stark clarity that I would never return to this house. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma, my best friend from high school who still lived in the area. We had plans to meet for lunch later in the week, but I needed her now. Family emergency. Any chance you could pick me up tonight? Need a place to stay? I typed with shaking fingers. Her response came immediately. On my way. 20 minutes. As I continued packing, I could hear hushed, heated conversation downstairs. Not once did footsteps approach my door. Not once did anyone come to apologize or ask me to stay. The family photos on my dresser, smiling faces at graduations, holidays, and vacations, now seemed like artifacts from a fiction, a family that existed only in carefully staged portraits. When Emma's text announced her arrival, I carried my suitcase downstairs. My parents and Jason sat in stony silence in the living room, the abandoned dinner still on the dining table. My mother stared straight ahead, refusing to acknowledge me. My father glanced up briefly, a flicker of something, regret, concern, crossing his face before he returned his attention to the muted television. I'll be staying with Emma for the rest of my time in Atlanta, then heading back to San Francisco, I announced to the room. I've already booked an earlier flight. No response. Goodbye, I said finally, my voice breaking on the word. As I walked out the front door for what I knew would be the last time, the only sound was the soft click of the latch behind me. Emma was waiting in her car, concern evident on her face. What happened? She asked as I loaded my suitcase into her trunk. I collapsed into the passenger seat and finally allowed the tears to flow freely. Between sobs, I explained the entire situation. The money, the deception, the confrontation, my mother's cruel words. You can stay with me as long as you need, Emma assured me, squeezing my hand before starting the car. They don't deserve you, Camila. For the next 3 days, I worked remotely from Emma's apartment, grateful for her spare bedroom and the space she gave me to process my grief. Because that's what it was. Grief. I was mourning the death of the family I thought I had, the relationships I had valued and nurtured despite the physical distance. When I returned to San Francisco, my apartment felt both like a sanctuary and a reminder of my aloneness. I moved through the following weeks in a fog, performing my job adequately, but finding little joy in anything. I scheduled an appointment with a therapist, recognizing that I needed professional help to process the magnitude of this betrayal. My brother Jason texted occasionally with superficial messages, never acknowledging the conflict or his role in it. I responded politely but briefly, maintaining the barest minimum of contact. From my parents, there was nothing but silence. Until 6 weeks after I'd left Georgia, when a text arrived from my father. Mortgage company called about missed payment. When are you sending the next installment? I stared at the message in disbelief, reading it multiple times to ensure I hadn't misunderstood. He wasn't apologizing. He wasn't asking how I was doing. He was expecting me to continue financially supporting them after they had thrown me out of their home. The audacity was breathtaking. The text from my father felt like a physical blow. I sat on my sofa, phone in hand, trying to comprehend the level of entitlement required to make such a request after what had transpired. It wasn't just tone deaf. It was a clear indication that they viewed me not as a daughter, but as a financial resource to be exploited. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I sought advice from my therapist, Dr. Winters, during our next session. This message suggests your parents believe your financial support is completely separate from your personal relationship, she observed. They seem to compartmentalize your roles. The dutiful daughter who provides money exists independently from the person who confronted them about their dishonesty. But that's not how relationships work, I argued, frustration evident in my voice. No, it's not, she agreed. Healthy relationships require respect, honesty, and consideration flowing in both directions. Over the next few days, I found myself increasingly curious about the family financial dynamics I might have been blind to previously. I reached out to Jason, keeping my tone casual, as I asked about how things were going at home. Dad's stressing about money again, he admitted. They asked Aunt Linda for a loan last week, but she turned them down. Said something about, not this time. Not this time. The phrasing suggested a pattern. Has this happened before? I probed gently. Family members giving them money. Jason's hesitation was telling. You know how they are with finances. Sometimes they need help. Usually it's been Grandma or Aunt Linda. You're just the newest target since you've been doing well. The pieces began to fall into place. With growing certainty, I realized my parents had a long history of financial manipulation, moving from one family member to another when their demands became too excessive or their deceptions were discovered. I consulted with an attorney who specialized in financial recovery. She was frank about my options. Since there was no written agreement legally, this could be considered a gift, she explained. However, there might be grounds for a civil claim based on fraudulent misrepresentation if you can prove they intentionally misled you about the purpose of the funds. The thought of pursuing legal action against my own parents was surreal, but I needed to protect myself. I authorized her to send a formal demand letter requesting repayment of the misappropriated funds. The reaction was swift and explosive. My phone blew up with angry messages from extended family members, aunts, uncles, cousins, all condemning me for being heartless and materialistic. My mother had apparently crafted a narrative, casting herself as the victim of an ungrateful daughter who had abandoned the family and was now demanding money from struggling parents. The most hurtful message came from my grandmother. I raised your mother to believe family comes first. I'm disappointed to see you don't share those values. I wanted to call her to explain the full story, but years of family dynamics had taught me that my mother's version would be the one believed. Instead, I drafted a simple, dignified response that I sent to everyone who had contacted me. I understand you've heard one version of recent events. I respect our family too much to engage in back-and-forth accusations. I've made the difficult decision to step back from financial entanglements that have become unhealthy. I hope for healing and clarity in time. It was non-confrontational while standing firm in my decision. I knew it wouldn't change most minds, but it was important to me to respond with integrity rather than escalating the drama. In the following weeks, I doubled down on building my independent life. I switched to a higher-paying position at a more established tech company. I began volunteering with a financial literacy program for young women. I expanded my social circle, cultivating friendships with people who demonstrated respect for boundaries and healthy communication. The legal process moved forward slowly. My parents initially ignored the demand letter, then responded through a budget attorney with a counteroffer of minimal monthly payments stretched over 7 years, an offer clearly designed to maintain control and connection rather than genuinely address the debt. Through it all, I held firm to my boundary. This wasn't about the money anymore. It was about breaking a destructive pattern and refusing to participate in an unhealthy dynamic. 1 year after the explosive confrontation in my parents' dining room, I stood in my new apartment in San Francisco, arranging fresh flowers in a vase by the window. The space was bright and airy, nearly twice the size of my previous place, a tangible symbol of the professional and personal growth I'd experienced since setting firm boundaries with my family. The legal matter had eventually been settled, though not entirely in my favor. After months of negotiations, my parents agreed to repay $10,000 of the misappropriated funds with payments structured over 2 years. The first few installments had arrived punctually, each check accompanied by a passive-aggressive note from my mother about their sacrifices to meet this obligation. I'd chosen to view the remaining $10,000 as the price of an invaluable lesson about relationships, boundaries, and self-respect. Some lessons come with steep tuition, but their worth cannot be calculated in mere dollars. My relationship with my family had fundamentally changed. After months of no contact, my father had reached out with a stiffly worded acknowledgement that perhaps they had not been entirely transparent about the financial situation. It wasn't exactly an apology, but it was the closest thing to accountability I'd received. We now maintained minimal structured contact, occasional text messages, birthday cards, a brief phone call every few months. The warmth and closeness I'd once cherished was gone, replaced by a cordial distance that protected my well-being. I grieved that loss, but recognized it as necessary. My brother Jason had surprisingly become more independent during this time. The family upheaval had apparently prompted him to reassess his own situation. He'd moved into an apartment with friends and enrolled in community college courses. Our relationship was tentatively rebuilding on new, more honest terms. Through therapy, I'd come to understand my family's dysfunctional patterns were generational. My mother had learned manipulative financial behaviors from her own parents, creating a cycle that would have continued indefinitely if someone hadn't broken it. That someone happened to be me, and while it came at a high emotional cost, I knew it was necessary. The most profound change, however, was internal. I discovered a resilience I hadn't known I possessed. The painful experience had stripped away my naive assumptions about family obligations and helped me develop healthier expectations for all relationships in my life. I'd also found purpose in helping others avoid similar situations. My volunteer work teaching financial literacy had expanded to include workshops specifically addressing financial boundaries in relationships. Sharing my experience, anonymized but authentic, helped others recognize warning signs I had missed. As I arranged the last flower in the vase, my phone chimed with a notification. It was an invitation to Thanksgiving dinner from Emma and her husband. No drama, just good food and better friends, the message promised. I smiled as I accepted. Family, I'd learned, wasn't defined by blood relation, but by mutual respect, honesty, and genuine care. I had lost the family I was born into, at least in the way I'd always imagined it, but I was building something perhaps more valuable, a chosen family founded on healthier principles. The journey had been painful, but I wouldn't trade the wisdom it brought. Some people live their entire lives trapped in toxic family dynamics, never recognizing they have the power to choose differently. I had found that power, and in doing so, had finally found peace. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision to protect your financial or emotional well-being? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more real-life experiences. Remember that establishing healthy boundaries isn't selfish. It's necessary for your personal growth. Thank you for listening, and I hope this story helps anyone facing similar challenges with their loved ones. Share this video with someone who might need to hear this message today.